This is All India Radio. In a special program, we now bring you a discussion on the highlights of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit 2022. The participants are Yogendra Kumar, former diplomat, Anshuman Mishra, Prasar Bharati Special Correspondent in Beijing, and Nilova Roy Chaudhary, journalist.
Prime Minister Modi ji is visiting Samarkand in Uzbekistan today for the 22nd meeting of the Council of Heads of State of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It is the first such in-person summit of the organization after a 2-year hiatus because of the COVID-19 pandemic. For a special discussion on the importance and the outcomes of this SCO meeting, we are joined by Ambassador Yogendra Kumar and Mr. Anshuman Mishra, Prasar Bharati Special Correspondent in Beijing. Ambassador, if I may turn to you first, everyone in India seems to view this summit as more dependent on whom the Prime Minister meets bilaterally. But the SCO is a regional organization comprising an area which is very vital to India's interests. Why is there this misperception, do you think? And exactly why is this summit being held today so very important for India's foreign policy?
The first thing is that the public image of this particular organization is not so salient in the Indian sort of general public discussion. But as you rightly mentioned, it's a very important organization for India. The strategic location of the member country is very important. So the organization has largely a focus on Central Asia. Also, in fact, the Foreign Secretary's briefing mentioned that we have a relationship with Central Asia, and this is our approach, including the extended neighborhood. So the point really is that it's a very important organization, and everybody who comes there, they're looking primarily, first of all, about Central Asia, and then from there to see how they can develop the relations. As we all know that in the current geopolitical turbulence, how it's impacting on different regions of the world, and certainly regions which are actually of strategic importance for India and other countries who are participating. I think this has its own significance. And the fact that they're meeting first time in person after 2019, after the Bishkek summit, they do want to engage. I mean, the fact is that bilaterals are important, undoubtedly. These leaders coming together in one common room, stating their point of view, and then the interaction taking place, I think that is very significant in my view.
Mr. Mishra, would that also be your assessment?
Of course. See, India has always been engaging with Central Asian countries bilaterally, and bilateral relations will always remain important, I believe, because there are many things which countries need to deal in a bilateral manner. At a multilateral forum, probably there are different kind of setup. There might be certain kind of restrictions or a little bit of impediments in approaching towards the issues. And also why bilateral meetings are important, because that also defines broader contours of how member countries are going to view each other or treat. For example, if we talk about India-China relations, or if we talk about Russia-Ukraine crisis, which has obviously created a lot of impact on various Central Asian countries, for example, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and other countries also who are still trying to sort of balance with Russia. So, of course, a multilateral setup is there, but bilateral relations are also important. There will be a lot of focus on that as well.
The point is that whatever the problems or otherwise are between countries bilaterally are not supposed to be reflected at all in the multilateral context. And given the fact that India will now be assuming the chair of the SCO after this summit, it's very critical that India sort of gets involved in the overall regional process. So what would it mean for India to be the next chair of Shanghai Cooperation Organization? And would it be possible for India to try and push some of its key priorities that the Prime Minister mentioned today, like uninterrupted supply chains and unhindered transit facilities? Ambassador Kumar?
Well, I think these are all very important issues. They are important not just for India, but certainly for Central Asian countries. In fact, even though bilateral issue was not raised, but the Prime Minister did give a broad hint when he mentioned that the right to transit, should all countries have full right to transit. And that obviously, you know what the reference really is, considering the fact that Central Asian countries are talking about various kind of connectivity infrastructure projects. India actually has to, now of course Iran having joined, so in one way, but India is still skirting around Southwest Asia to actually gain access to Central Asia. So you have a lot of issues. Connectivity is an important issue. Trade is an important issue. The fact is that Central Asian countries in particular, I should say, they've had the double whammy. First of the COVID crisis, and then, of course, the Ukraine crisis, energy prices, the food prices, and generally for these countries, it has that kind of an impact. So the point here is that it provides a broader focus, a gamut for developing trade and economic cooperation. And we have a very broad agenda of cooperation, including in the SCO. The Prime Minister talked about traditional medicine. He's talked about civilizational links. He's talked about the MSMEs, how they actually have to be propped up, the startups, issues like sustainable economic development. And of course, the infrastructure itself. As you can see what India is doing now to get transit in different ways. You have the trade and transit agreements. You also have the infrastructure required for that. So whether it is Chabahar or whether India being involved in providing the rail link between Chabahar and the Iran-Turkmenistan border. So all these actually are very important for the regional stability. And obviously it is a part of Eurasian heartland. So if some development which takes place there, it has an impact on India. And Afghanistan, as you know, is sandwiched between South Asia and, of course, Central Asia, Iran and the other countries.
Prime Minister said in his address today that India supports cooperation and mutual trust among SCO members. Mr. Mishra, how do you think, given the context of sort of prickly geopolitical relations, how do you think this would be an achievable target? What do you think India should do?
Well, this is always a desirable thing to achieve a mutual trust and cooperation among members of a multilateral body. And that's why Prime Minister has clearly mentioned, and India has always tried to maintain this kind of relations with all the members in multilateral group. As far as India's upcoming presidency and how much India will be able to achieve this, it's a matter of time to see. But I'm sure that India would be able to achieve this given the kind of recent developments and the changing geopolitics and geoeconomy. So all those things are definitely going to shape the discourse among the SCO countries on various issues, either related to the region or at the global level. For example, the Samarkand Declaration talked about the regional stability, sustainable economic development, transport and communication ties.
I'm just trying to get a sense of the kind of problems that exist between a lot of countries. How is it going to be possible to use the forum of these SCO to build a greater mutual cooperation? For example, as Ambassador Kumar kept pointing out about the transit facilities that we lack. I mean, we do not have any way of actually reaching Central Asia, even though it would have been very easy if a transit had been allowed, and we know which country is blocking it. So how do you think that can be overcome? That was my question, Mr. Mishra.
Lilo, it's a work in progress. It's an ongoing process to increase the cooperation and trust among the member countries. If you're talking about this transit through a particular country, so obviously that might be a difficult task. It's an ongoing process and discussion deliberations. For that matter, when India has taken up the SCO chairmanship, I think we should not try to jump to any conclusion at this moment probably, because still a lot of things are yet to be done.
Ambassador Kumar, India has been in charge of the regional anti-terrorism cooperation, the RATS part of the SCO, which is really a very critical part of why India has been a member of this organization. What exactly has been India's several contributions in this particular area in this past year? And of course, Afghanistan would have figured very crucially. Could you sort of elaborate a little on what Indian initiatives have been and how effective they have been in going ahead?
I should first point out that the RATS, as it is called, anti-terrorism structure based in Tashkent, it actually came into existence in 2004. Paradoxically, ironically, when the Taliban were actually experiencing resurgence. So you can see the context in which this particular organization came into existence. Now, of course, formally, the RATS charter is the same as that the SCO because it's a part of the SCO. That is to combat terrorism, separatism, and extremism. And then, of course, it maintains working contacts, including data bank with member states through their permanent representatives, and also aims to coordinate the UN Security Council and the Terrorism Committee. The point here is that they actually are in a way quite active. And the fact of the matter is that we have taken part in a significant manner. As you know, our National Security Advisor, he has addressed the RATS meeting. And we also have a representative. Our ambassador in Tashkent is the permanent representative to the RATS committee. There is an active collaboration which is taking place. Obviously, we cannot exaggerate its importance because you understand the dynamic amongst the member countries of the SCO. Because there are a lot of terrorist organizations. You see the point here that the terrorist organizations are actually developing a whole lot of these kind of interlinkages. Some of these people who are based in Afghanistan, they are a threat for Central Asia, they are a threat for China, they are a threat for India, for Pakistan, for Iran, and so many other countries. So you find that there is a common ground where India collaborates and benefits from this membership. In fact, I remember reading at that time, I do not know what's the outcome of that the NSA actually has suggested the RATS can be further reformed so that our cooperation actually becomes much more proactive, so to say, or much more instantaneous in that sense.
Ambassador Kumar, the situation in Afghanistan since the Taliban takeover and the fact that there are all these hostilities also now in Ukraine, how important is the actual regional anti-terrorist structure of RATS that the SCO has? How effectively can it deal with the likelihood of Afghanistan, for example, again becoming a hub of terror in the region?
The SCO website, it mentioned that between 2011 and 2015, the SCO member states managed to prevent 20 planned terrorist attacks, neutralized 440 terrorist training camps, extradited 213 terrorists or extremists, and 1,700 member terrorist organizations apart from the interdiction of drug trafficking activities. Now, that's what they're saying officially. Now, there are 2-3 different aspects. You understand it's very complex. Even among friendly intelligence agencies, there's never a complete sharing of information, as you know. And here, the relationship among various countries is very complicated. But there is a common ground which India is tapping into, and India wants to work further on that. That's very clear from Foreign Secretary's briefing. In addition to that, I think we also know that India has bilateral consultations on terrorism with Central Asian countries, and these are found to be very useful from our point of view. So you find the different channels through which you are actually working on this menace of terrorism in the region as it affects. And of course, you also know that recently, some time back, we also had an anti-terrorism exercise where SC member countries joined, except that Pakistan was represented by an observer. So the point is that we have mechanism for cooperation among security agencies in a manner of speaking, I must say. The military forces, also we have anti-terrorism military exercises. I don't want to exaggerate, but let's say a country like India, which has its own kind of external security and terrorist challenges, India actually finds some fruitful ground where, productive ground where actually it can collaborate in a certain way. Of course, as I said, that these are very sensitive matters and we will never get to know the full information in public knowledge. But surely the fact that India was the chair of RATS, the Foreign Secretary is talking about further improvements, National Security Advisor talked about that. So I think that the government at the senior most level sees that there is a benefit derived from that.
India and the Central Asian leadership also had their first summit this year as a dedicated summit. Further improves the interoperability between the Central Asian nations, which form a significant part of the SCO, and India. So I think even from that point of view, RATS is a very important organization, not only for India, but for the entire region as a whole.
Indeed, I think that's why every country participates in this quite actively. In fact, what is called the C5+1 dialogue, that is 5 Central Asian countries plus the external interlocutors, India actually first had at the level of foreign ministers. This meeting actually took place in Samarkand, as far as I was just checking from my notes, at the level of foreign ministers. And this was 2019. And in fact, there have been several meetings since then. And the first time now we had the meeting at the summit level. The point here is that, we have a regional issue, or let's say a region of interest to us. So the different manner, different way, different formats in which we actually engage with the region and see how we can actually make our own contribution in our mutual interest. So that is actually an ongoing process, undoubtedly.
Ambassador, the Prime Minister, of course, was pushing for various things that India will probably be prioritizing during its tenure after this particular summit gets over to head the SCO. He talked, of course, about traditional medicine and how India is among the most affordable destinations for medical and wellness tourism. Some aspects of trade and Food security is the other very, very important aspect that he spoke about today, because given what's over the pandemic and then with this Ukraine crisis, food prices and supply chains have been severely disrupted. So are these signs of what India is going to be seeking to prioritize during its tenure as head of the SCO after today?
Indeed, as you mentioned, that the Prime Minister in his opening remarks flagged some of the key areas, three priority areas. We have all discussed about greater cooperation, mutual trust amongst the members, global supply chains needing for energy and food crisis in the wake of the pandemic, also how resilient these supply chains need to be, because it is not just a regional issue, it's a global issue. So wherever we can build these kind of resilient supply chains, I think it is something which actually we all, not just us, the whole world, all countries are actually looking as to how to develop these kind of supply chains. And of course, connectivity remains important. And of course, the Prime Minister mentioned that the SCO should be holding a millet food festival. That is basically healthy nutrition, which is actually, in fact, he's been talking in his Mann Ki Baat and also in his conversation with the UN Secretary General that, the coarse grains actually are not only nutritious, but they are so easily accessible. It is just that our food habits in a way have been so distorted that we have actually to get back into the habit of healthy eating.
Let's get back to Anshuman. He's sort of waiting to flag a few issues on India's priorities, India's tenure as chair of the SCO. Could you please tell us a little bit of whether you think the Prime Minister was flagging India's priorities, or are there likely to be some more also included?
Prime Minister's speech today quite a bit, reflected India's priorities. So there are a few new things. For example, the connectivity, the global supply chains, these resilient and diversified global supply chains, these India has been saying since the COVID pandemic disrupted the supply chains. So this is something which we have been saying and everybody is talking about. But the new things, for example, this Millet Food Festival. So India has spearheaded the proposal at United Nations General Assembly, approved by other countries. So that 2023 will be celebrated or observed as International Year of Millets to increase food security and nutrition security and all. So that is one thing which India has prioritized, and India's presidency of SCO could not have come at a better time, especially from this viewpoint, as India planning to, do a millet food festival within SCO. Probably India should be able to do that. Apart from that, when India was chair of SCO heads of government in 2020, it proposed many initiatives, including the initiative, the Forum on Startups and Innovation. So in last 2 years, a lot of work has been done, and now when India is going to be the president, so it will establish, SCO has approved, the member countries have approved the special working group establishment on startup and innovation. And as PM mentioned, that there are more than 70,000 startups, out of them more than 100 are unicorns. So India's experience will be definitely helpful for SCO countries, especially for Central Asian countries who, as part of the SCO region, are looking for, more sustainable economic development, part of regional prosperity and other linkages. These things are very important from India's viewpoint. Other than that, the situation in Afghanistan. So that is very important for India from security viewpoint, as I was telling you about the RAST architecture. So, India's NSA has already convened a meeting of NSAs of SCO countries. Apart from that, I would like to add that many Middle Eastern countries now, Iran has already become part of SCO, and many others are.
For example, India is talking about the Millet Festival and so on, which essentially is also taking away some of the focus from the primary food grain with wheat. Is that likely to be hitting Russia unfavorably? Is Russia reacting to something like that?
I don't see that angle coming into this proposal by India, because this proposal is more based on India's more strength in agriculture and India's strength in production of millet, because India is one of the largest producers of millet. And it is one of the very good alternatives for traditional cereal crops in terms of nutrition as well as in terms of cultivation. It is also a crop which is climate friendly, which is very resilient, and which can be grown in adverse climatic situations. It can create a lot of employment opportunities for small farmers and everything. So this angle is more important from food security viewpoint, and it's not going to hurt anyone, as I understand.
Yes, I was just going to ask you. Yes, could you weigh in on this one, please?
Yes, actually, the millet, basically what the Prime Minister has meant, as my understanding is, millet means coarse grains. So
Yes.
all agricultural production all over the world, there is a component of coarse grain. It is done by small farmers. So the Prime Minister in his last Mann Ki Baat, he mentioned as to how the entire food processing sector has to be reoriented towards the processing of coarse grains. So that is, so in one way it is as a completely reorienting not only the agricultural kind of a production sort of system, so to say, but even the food processing industry, of course, towards more healthy kind of food, nutrition, and that adds something of attraction to all countries. I mean, whichever country we're talking about. That's why the United Nations is actually calling next year, marking it as a World Coarse
In fact,
Grain Year.
Ambassador, this would also be impacting on the other very, very major issue, which is climate change. I mean, Pakistan is suffering these devastating floods. China has had a massive heat waves and floods recently. I mean, every country in the SCO itself is affected very severely. Would something like this also be helping the global fight against climate change that SCO can perhaps spearhead?
Well, yes, I think it will be certainly a component because in one of India's priorities as the presidency or the president of the SCO, actually, work out programs for sustainable economic development. So weaving in the millet or the coarse grains into that aspect of India's priorities, I think it has those larger implications. But I should also add that obviously this is just one aspect of the larger sort of challenge of climate change, but it's an important aspect because the first impact actually is on food production. This is what the Pakistan government has been saying this time, and this is what, as you can hear also in other places wherever these kind of extreme weather events take place, the first victim is food, and which means the poor people because their access to food, in terms of the food prices and all the other things get severely affected. So I think in a way it's part of that, but certainly just one part.
And Anshuman, would you like to weigh in on the discussion on climate change? How important can SCO be as a spearhead to sort of, do things holistically and concertedly to counter this devastating effects of climate change?
Nilo, I think SCO has to play a major role, and it is a very serious concern for all the SCO countries, including China, which is world's largest carbon emitter, and at the same time it is facing very adverse climatic situations, ranging from floods to drought, and many induced side effects like power shortage and all. So China also has a lot to do in this field, and a cooperation in this area among SCO countries, in addition to cooperation with Western countries, other large carbon emitters, for example, United States, and also cooperate. At least in terms of climate change cooperation, the cooperation will be needed at a global level, but looking at the size of SCO countries in terms of population and the geographical expanse, I'm sure that SCO can definitely play a leading role in climate resilience and mitigation.
Finally, the Prime Minister mentioned that he wants to make India this manufacturing hub. So the next very important issue again within SCO is the trade issue. So Ambassador, how do you think the placing of India that he did is going to sort of further the trade connections between the SCO countries?
Just before, I just want to add one point about climate change, because it's an issue of sharing of technology, it's an issue of reorienting our entire production process, it's an issue of capacity building, it's an issue of capacity building at the grassroots level. So you can see there's a whole gamut of challenges which actually where the collaboration actually is going to help, and India has considerable experience in that. Now coming to the manufacturing side, as you know, again, I think in a way it's part of the flexible supply chains and the fact that, the world is experiencing both geopolitical and geoeconomic shocks. So we have to find different ways in which we can actually mitigate the adverse impact of that. And as you know that India, fortunately, I must say that it has been attracting very major amount of foreign investment, including manufacturing sort of investment. And therefore, it's an open invitation for many countries who are members of the SCO, not just the members, but also the observer, the dialogue partners, to actually showcase that, I think India is already developing its manufacturing capabilities very well, and is better placed actually collaborate with all the SCO member countries and the SCO family in the manner of speaking, the dialogue partners, the observers, join in this, and it's for everybody's benefit.
Anshuman, similarly, China is back to being India's largest trading partner. So within that context, and the fact that the Prime Minister mentioned India's very impressive growth rate this time that is forthcoming, how do you think that can be a pitch for improved trade between the SCO countries?
Srilova, if I can give you one data about the trade among the SCO countries, so that amounts to $6 trillion. So that amount says itself that how much potential SCO countries have and have already achieved. And definitely there are a lot of scope for improvement in this with the increase in the connectivity, the diversification and resilience of supply chains. As India and China and Russia are three major countries in the region, then after joining Iran, another economic power and many other Central Asian countries. So definitely the economic potential is definitely going to increase, and that is also one of the major focus of today's discussions, as mentioned in Samarkand Declaration about sustainable economic development, and they have also signed many documents in this regard on the apart from the Samarkand Declaration.
The fact that Prime Minister flagged all of the important issues, it's very clear that transit facilities also helps tourism, which is the other major collaborative feature of all of these countries. But I'm afraid I think we've run right out of time. So thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Yogendra Kumar and Mr. Anshuman Mishra. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on highlights of Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit 2022. The participants were Yogendra Kumar, former diplomat, Anshuman Mishra, Prasar Bharati Special Correspondent in Beijing, and Nilova Rai Chaudhary, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.